Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Donna Banks, and I am the Director of Development here at the Town Hall. I'm also the creator of this program, A Return to Civic Discourse. Thank you for being part of this inaugural event. We're really happy to have you here. For those of you who don't know, Town Hall was founded in 1921 by the League for Political Education, a group of women suffragists who believed that public education had transformative power. Public education and civic discourse were very important to them. Today, Town Hall is mostly known as a performing arts venue, but with you here today, with your help, we are returning to our roots of civic engagement. Today's panel discussion focuses on the low-wage crisis, and we are thrilled to have three distinguished panelists here today to share with you their solutions to this critical social issue. Now, we need your help with this. We need your engagement to help make this successful. We would like your participation, your responses to discussion questions that are going to be presented on the screen. You'll see a QR code. Please scan it, and then you'll be able to respond to the questions that are there. Toward the end, we would very much appreciate your feedback on this entire event. This is the first of many series to come, and your feedback can help us make this better in the future. So I would like to give a special thank you to the students of York Prep and the educators who are here with us today, as well as those who are joining via live stream. And of course, once again, to you in the audience. I would like to give a special thank you to Ray, I said I would not screw up his name, Ray Rigoyoso, who has, I just call him Ray, I never use his last name, who has been with me since the very beginning in developing this program. So now I would like to welcome the moderator, Maritza Silva-Farrell, to the stage, as well as the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna, and good afternoon, everyone. How's everybody feeling today? Great, yeah? Okay, well, thank you so much for taking time of your day to come and listen to this incredible panel of folks and experts who have been dealing with this question of low-wage workers and how do we really change our economy. So my name is Maritza Silva-Farrell. I am with the Ford Foundation with the Future of Workers program. At the program, we support a lot of the work that organizations are doing. Some of them are here today, addressing this issue of income inequality in our country and around the world. But before we get started, I think I would like to also just share, we have Manjari, Larry, and Julia. I want to say thank you to you all for coming in today to this event and this incredible place. I have to say, this is a little bit intimidating to be up at the stage and a little bit humbling to be here with all of you. So Manjari, we're going to start with you today specifically. But before we get started, we want to actually engage you all in the conversation. This is going to be a different type of panel where we want your opinions, we want your thoughts. So before we get started, what we're going to do is we're going to actually have some questions for you that are going to be on the panel. If you're ready with your QR code, do you know how to use it? Say yes, no? Yeah? Excellent. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over some specific questions. Manjari, Larry, and Julia will be able to answer some of that. And then we want to hear your perspective and see if some of that stuff matches out. So we're going to ask for our AV help to help us with some of the questions that we're going to get started with. Manjari Rahman first. see the... It's here. All right. Can you get to the QR code briefly? This is going to be a poll. Do you believe in poll? Oh, see, if you do believe in polls, then you can actually take the QR code and let us know what you think and see if the audience and the panels match on the findings. Also, while we do this, let me also welcome folks who are online. Thank you for joining us online. We want to hear from you as well, so in any way possible that you can join in, let us know. All right, is the poll ready? What do we got? So the question was, most low-wage positions are entry-level positions, providing work experience to young workers or young people. True or false? 90% just told us that that is false. I'm going to let Manjari, the expert who has been doing tons of research on this, to let us know some of the work that you've been doing, Manjari, and I'm going to pass it on to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here to discuss this very, very serious topic. And I'm thrilled to see so many young people in the room because, you know, people like us who are working today on projects that are called Future of Work, you all are going to be part of it. And we are at the cusp of starting to find solutions. You all will be implementing this. So I just want to share, I work at the Harvard Business School in a project called Managing the Future of Work. And we recently did a lot of research, I think for the first time in any business school, on what role business can play in helping America's low-wage workers. You can find, just Google Managing the Future of Work at Harvard Business School, look for a report called Building from the Bottom Up, and all the research I'm going to talk about will be available there. So you just saw this very interesting video. And unlike all of you who are smart enough to know that low-wage workers are not just all young people, what did we see in the video? Mr. Jamie Dimon asking that lady, this is an entry-level worker doing her first job? And that lady responded. But no, the reality is low-wage jobs are held by an incredibly high number of people in the US economy. 44% of all adults in working ages, 25 and above, are in a low-wage job. For the purpose of our research, we defined low wages as folks who are earning less than $39,000 in a household of 3, or as an individual earning $7, $10, $15, not more than $20 per hour. In big cities, $20 means a lot. In a smaller city, it can be just $7 to $10. Who are low-wage workers? They come in all shapes and sizes. They are not young. They come in all age groups. In fact, if you look at the data longitudinally, you find older workers are increasingly taking on these low-paying hourly jobs. They are predominantly women. They are people of all races are in these jobs. All kinds of occupations across industries are in these jobs. EMTs, assistant teachers, nursing assistants. You take any call center employees, truck drivers, warehouse workers. It goes on and on and on. As I describe these positions, what are they? These are actually essential positions. When COVID happened, it was these low-wage workers that kept the economy running. It was not us remote employees that mattered. It was people who were delivering food, people who were in hospitals, people who were keeping transportation services running. And it's a big, big wake-up call to our companies. And our research is very focused on what is the role business is going to take in this issue. it is not enough to say government should be responsible for it. It is not enough to say unions can take care of it. It's not enough to say a transfer payment can solve it. It's not enough to say the social sector or the not-for-profit sector has to solve this. The most important people who have to step up are those who employ these low-wage workers. And what our research showed was that there is a gross lack of commitment, engagement, and understanding about low-wage workers within companies, whether it is a small company, a medium-sized company, or a large company. We surveyed employers, and we surveyed low-wage workers, and we found that low-wage workers love where they work. They want to stay where they work. The most important thing that matters to them is the location of a place. And if they have good transport and a stable schedule, they want to work and stay there. They want to grow there. But most workers are trapped in low-wage positions. We looked at 185,000 resumes of low-wage workers over 5 years. And in 5 years, they could not escape and get to a higher wage level. So how is it that you're working for 5 years, you're gaining experience, you maybe change jobs, but your salary still stays beneath the low-wage trap? That's because across industries, we're paying low. And it is not all about pay. You can't pay your way out of the low-wage problem. Pay is linked to productivity. Companies have to understand that if you invest in those workers and give them the training they need, show them the career pathways that they can have, they will do the work required to train themselves and rise. But we found in our research that companies are not giving low-wage workers the 3 things that many of us take for granted at work. They provide no mentorship, they provide no career pathways, and they provide no plan for training to move to the next level. Companies are not going to be able to give salary away. That's not how productivity works. But if workers are trained, then it works well for both sides. So Mr. Diamond says, I don't know, I need to think about it. Many business leaders don't think about it, and they put up with a lot of churn of low-wage workers, constant lack of retention. Those are bad metrics for companies. There is a very good, very strong business case to invest in low-wage workers. And this research actually provides the handbook for what any employer can do to help their workers keep those positions filled and have a better, stronger, more competitive organization.
Thank you so much for that. So if you haven't looked at the research, we'll make sure that you have the resources so that you can look at some of the analysis that has been done. You talk about wage stagnation, and I think the best person who can share with us some of the studies and analysis that have been done in terms of how that does impact the economy of our country will be Larry Mitchell. Larry is a former president of the Economic Policy Institute, now retired, but is still doing a lot of incredible analysis as to how this low-wage economy is impacting not only workers, but our entire economy. So you'll share a little bit more about that. And I also want to point out something that you said that I wanted to see if you can bring it back to us into your comments. The role that employers play in addressing income inequality in our country. Do they play a role? Let us know more.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, so my view is that wages have fared very poorly over the last 4 decades, and this is because there's been a very conscious strategy to suppress wages by the business practices and the government policies that we've seen. This has amounted to a loss of about 43% of the typical workers' hourly wages and benefits, a loss of about $10 an hour. The important reason for identifying that it is policies that have caused this is that if policies have caused it, and it's not just the doings of the economy, then political power and new policies can make life different. And that's what's really important. To me, the remedy is to empower workers by a commitment to persistently low unemployment, rebuilding collective bargaining, improving labor standards like the minimum wage, ending non-compete and forced arbitration agreements, and not undercutting workers with low-wage globalization. And if given a chance, I'll talk about how I think that's actually what the Biden administration has been trying to do. So the first slide is just to give you the sense that there's one line called productivity that's been rising the whole post-war period. Think about that as the growth of the economic pie per hour worked. The other line is the wages and benefits per hour of a typical worker. And you'll see over the first few decades, they grew in tandem. But in the 1970s, they departed. And they departed for two reasons. One, there was a shift of income from wages to profits. It would take across the board 9% wage increase just to get wages back to their share of income in 1979. The other thing is a growth of inequality among people who earn wages, which includes CEOs. CEOs saw their wages grow by over 1,100% in the period after 1978. The top 1% grew 172%. The top 0.1%, that's the top 1,000th, 344%, while the bottom 90% had their wages grow 30%. This unequal growth shifted around 10% of all wages to the top 10%. Next slide. So, why? We're going to get into the whys in the next two slides. Those are my only other two slides. The point here is that wages could be $33 an hour, but they only rose to $23 an hour. That's a $10 an hour shortfall over 4 decades. That's a loss of over $2.50 per decade. Next slide. So I want to focus on the policy actions that I think caused this divergence, which is documented in a paper of mine. When I mean policy decisions, that's both things that were done, like undertaking certain free trade agreements or deregulations, but also omissions. The failure to raise the minimum wage, the failure to correct our labor laws, which make it very hard to build a union. So I want to just focus on the top 4 factors. The first that gets too little attention is that there's been excessive unemployment. And that's been a conscious policy. High interest rates to beat inflation, not being concerned about full employment. That in and of itself has cost workers $2.31 for the median worker over 4 decades, which is about 10% of the whole problem. The average unemployment rate in this period was around 6.2%. It could have been far lower. And if it were just 5.5% rather than 6.2%, we would have had wages that were 10% higher. The second, eroded collective bargaining. Our labor law does not protect workers' ability to unionize or to obtain an agreement. This alone has cost workers 8% over this 40-year period, $1.84. This affects both union workers and non-union workers because when unions raise wages in the union sector, the non-union workers in that sector also get raises. It was 8% overall and almost 12% for men. Globalization. People have heard about NAFTA, trade with China and all that. That's cost about 6%. That doesn't just affect manufacturing workers, although that's the way it's talked about. It affects workers, all basically non-college educated workers, because when you don't have your job in manufacturing anymore, you're competing with other workers and it drives down all wages. These 3 factors alone created more than half of the wage suppression. Other factors, just to mention, there's the growth of non-compete agreements, there's the growth of misclassification where people are treated as independent contractors rather than the employees that they really are. There's the erosion of overtime pay for white-collar workers. There's the fact that firms like Walmart and Amazon are able to suppress incomes in the supply chain, depressing wages and profits. Let me get to the two factors that are most important for low-wage work, not for the median or middle-wage worker. The minimum wage is huge. The minimum wage sets the wage for the bottom third of the workforce. If we had minimum wages as high as, let's say, the $15 or $20 an hour proposals, that would affect a third of the workers. The minimum wage used to be roughly half of the typical worker's wage. It's now only 25%. So its effectiveness is quite low. It's fallen 41%, inflation adjusted, from its peak in 1968. 36% from just 1979. For low-wage workers, this lowered their wage by at least 16% alone. Excessive unemployment. You know, when there's high unemployment, workers can't, they can't easily go get another job. They have very little bargaining power over with their employers. This is especially bad for low-wage workers. It's bad for middle-wage workers. For low-wage workers, they lost at anywhere from, I would say, 12 to 20% over the last 40 years because of excessive unemployment. So let me just close with what the answer isn't. For many decades, the business community and some of their allies in the economics profession have claimed that workers are having problems because of the unfortunate side effect of fast automation or technological growth, for which workers don't have the right skills to be able to keep up. I've done a lot of research on this, happy to provide it. It's not true. We have had automation and fast automation for many, many decades. If automation were the problem, then you'd have to find evidence that it was either faster or different and worse for workers over the last 30 years. Every indicator we have says that's not true. The growth of productivity has not been higher, the growth of capital investment, the growth of software investment, the rate at which people change occupations, the gap between college-educated workers and high school educated workers, which is supposed to be a signal of the wages of skilled versus unskilled, that has not grown very much at all over the last 30 years. So, this automation story cannot account for the fact that the top 1%, 0.1% in CEOs got these superlative wage increases, unless you think their individual productivity was as good as 1,100%. And so with that, I'll stop.
Yeah. Thank you, Larry. Thank you so much. That last point, I think, I wanna bring us all together again because I'd like you to take a poll. Is that right? Like, how do you all see it? Like, that's the perspective, that's the study that has been done. But is that the major factor driving wage stagnation and wage suppression? Which one is it? An unfortunate side effect of ongoing automation and workforce with skill deficits? Is it that? Or is it the policy choices that have been made regarding unemployment, unions, and minimum wages, which undermine worker power? There's two options, so take a moment to answer and see if, what do you think? We're getting some background news in the back, but yeah, let's take a look at this. These findings. Policy choices, 94%. As it grows a little bit up, yeah. Well, I think the extensive studies are showing a mix of what, Larry, you have just pointed out, and I think at this moment I would like to just bring us back again and really have some of the options on which some of the policymakers have been talking about quite a bit, speaking of policy specifically. So Juliana Danur, you are someone who has been doing extensive research around universal basic income, and you see that as a potential solution, perhaps, and an entry point to address some of these problems. Juliana is an associate professor of philosophy and affiliate faculty of law at the New York University in NYU. Juliana founded and directed the Stanford Basic Income Lab at Stanford University. So Juliana, would like to just pass it on to you.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you everyone for being here. So today I would like to talk to you about universal basic income, also known as guaranteed income in some corners, and which shares a lot of ties with other policies like the negative income tax. It's a very simple idea, and the notion is to give all members of a community unconditional cash, no strings attached, and without work requirement. So there are a variety of proposals out there, and the details matter very much. But you can think of $1,000 a month for each adult individual. So if you're a single individual, that's $12K a year. If you're a couple, that's $24K. If you have children, you get an extra portion of that $1,000 for each kid. The basic idea really is to eradicate income poverty and to alleviate economic insecurity, which have disastrous effects on our physical, mental health, on children, on the well-being of children, on education, on crime. So the idea really is that it's a moral imperative for wealthy countries to build a robust floor. MLK Jr. had a very simple way of putting it. It said that it's the single, simplest, and most efficient way to eradicate poverty. The program has a very long history, dating back all the way to people like Thomas Paine, who argued that we are all owed a share of the wealth that surrounds us, and that's natural resources. A similar framing of basic income has been the notion that we are all owed a share in the wealth that was produced by previous generations and passed on to us. Or, and this kind of corresponds with the conversation we just had on productivity, that we are all due a share of the wealth we co-produce collectively as workers, even as consumers, data sharers, etc. So most recently, basic income has been revived. There has been kind of a revival of interest. So I wanted to draw your attention to, for instance, Mayors for Guaranteed Income, which is a group of mayors throughout the country, more than 100, who are piloting versions of guaranteed income, basic income in their cities. In some respects, stimulus checks, the child tax credits are also programs that are kind of underpinned by this vision that direct cash transfers can play a role in eradicating poverty and undermining economic insecurity. So what does this have to do with the low-wage crisis? Because of course UBI is trying to do a range of things, but today we are talking about the low-wage crisis. So I wanted to talk to you about three ways in which it's connected with the low-wage crisis. The first one is quite simple. The low-wage crisis is a crisis of economic insecurity. Universal basic income is for everyone, workers and non-workers. So it can be used as a supplement from income from labor. But many of our benefits exclude people who are in work or make it such that people are faced with impossible calculus, whereby an hour of extra work can sometimes have a punitive effect on the benefits they receive. So it's very important when we try to devise a very robust safety net and build a robust income floor that workers are included too. Second, low-wage crisis is a crisis of what I will call predatorial exploitation. Individuals have little options. When they have little options, there are a range of people who take advantage of that. We've just talked about employers who take advantage of this. When you have to accept any job, the first job that comes your way, well then plenty of people are going to exploit that lack of choice that you're faced with. When people are getting unconditional cash, there is ample evidence now that they don't simply withdraw from the labor market en masse. People want to work. But what is becoming apparent is that they can be pickier when they have cash they can rely on independent of labor. They don't have to accept the first job that comes their way. They can weld a little, they can try something else, they can use the cash to retrain, they can move, they can relocate, or they can decide to do work that's unwaged, sometimes for a year, sometimes for a few months. if it suits them better. They can be caregivers, they can look after their child or an aging parent. They just have more options in front of them. So there is a sense in which giving workers, giving anyone for that matters, cash independent from labor increases their exit options, right? And it's an important aspect of resisting this vicious cycle of predatory lending. Last, the low-wage crisis is a crisis of bargaining power. And that's very much connected with my previous point about exit. It's really important to empower workers to demand better working conditions. And that ability increases when workers have genuine exit options. Now, of course, like I said, people want to work. So it's going to be very important for there to be good working opportunities around us. And that requires a lot more than just giving people cash. But it's also important to empower workers with exit options so that they have an increased voice and they can bargain for better working conditions. So I would just end and conclude by saying that there's no way in which universal basic income is a silver bullet that's going to get us out of this low-wage crisis on its own. As my co-panelists have discussed, there is a range of other things that need to happen and need to be done. But I think it's really important to, at least from the standpoint of government, to devise very robust safety nets that include both those who are low-wage workers, but all those who are also suffering from abject poverty and economic insecurity, who are sometimes unwaged, right? And so won't be affected by some of the other measures that we're considering here. Thank you so much. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Juliana. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that presentation. Really appreciate those insights, and thank you to the three of you for those questions. I want to just invite you all to take the last poll. I know that your opinion is really important on universal basic income. Can that play a role in increasing bargaining power for workers? How do you see it? We'd love to get your opinion, whether it is online or it's here. Please take a moment. Do you think that, yes, that could be the solution? No, it's not. Or you are undecided and want to learn some more. And of course, Juliana will be around to share more thoughts if anyone has any more questions on this. And on speaking of that, look at the poll is going. So, wow. Look at that, Larry. It's growing. The number is 66% of yes, 8% no, and 26% undecided. But thank you all for taking that poll. That's a really important piece of information for folks who are looking at this as a potential solution, and it might or might not work. I also wanted to share that we're going to be getting questions from all of you as well. So if you have any questions, there is a QR code also on the playbill. You can, take a look at that and ask questions through that. There is somebody taking those questions that will get to us. And you can also get to the mic. We're going to take 2 questions in a moment. But before we get to that, I have a general question for the three of you. As you spoke about potential policy solutions, you spoke about the issue of employers, the role that employers play in retaining workers, really being participant, right? Not necessarily as the video shows. We don't want that kind of employer, right? That type of participation. You want something that is more in-depth, something that really addresses the needs of workers. And how really all of those things combined, enables workers to gain power. Like how do you collect the bargaining for collective power, right? So you talked about this a little bit. So maybe you just kick us off. I mean, this is actually something that I just thought would be good to know. Like, how do you all feel the current administration actually address those issues that the Biden administration, maybe that question goes for you, Larry. Like, has the Biden administration done anything on this? Any thoughts on it?
Well, thanks for that question. I've been a critic of government policy of both parties for many decades. And I find myself for the first time really feeling that there's an administration that centers the interest of workers. And it's done that in a number of ways. The first was it launched an effort to get us out of the COVID recession that was very rapid, extremely rapid employment growth, got us to unemployment that was very low, below 4%. It's still in the low 4%. It's the lowest unemployment that we have records for black workers. Incredibly drop in unemployment for disabled workers that we'll talk about later. And overall, it has led to a growth of wages that is much faster in the bottom half than the top half, which I would say is also, this is the first time really in 4 decades that that's been the case. So a commitment to full employment, which I got to tell you, there was a lot of criticism of their policies and remains. They blame it for the inflation, which I don't think is true. But they took risks on the side of workers. When have you seen an administration take risks on the side of workers? Now, this is complemented by other policies, and I'll stop talking. But there's a real commitment to rebuilding collective bargaining. They can't pass the laws that they want, but they're doing everything possible by their actions and their words in the appointments to the National Labor Relations Board, et cetera. There's a commitment to high labor standards, raising the minimum wage, which they are tying to contractors, which they're seeking. You know, there's other types of regulations that have to do with employers not misclassifying workers, or the fact that making sure that joint employers like McDonald's are held accountable for their franchises, stuff like that. And on globalization, there's no big advancement of new free trade treaties. Their international economic policy, their priority was how to make sure that corporations pay profits with international agreements across the board. That's something we haven't seen. So I'm not telling you who to vote for, but I'm just saying, as an economist who's been focused on this my entire life, I've been very gratified to see that people have taken this set of policies.
Thank you, Larry, for that. I don't know if Manjari or Juliana, you want to address anything about the administration. If not, I have another question actually for you, Manjari. Like, you talk about employers, right? Like, is it the fastest way to improve the working conditions for low-wage workers to increase better practices in the businesses by all the employers, or by better policies that are done by federal government? Which one of those or both are the right approach based on the research and analysis that you've done?
I think everything that has been said on the panel, you can see how complex the issue is. It's not just about employment, it's about people staying in employment, it's about people growing in employment, it's about having financial security, it's about earning enough that you have financial security, you don't need to work 2 jobs a day and still have debt and still be sleeping in your car and not be able to go to work. So it's complex. But I think, so we've done a great job as a panel to highlight the doom and gloom. But the future, hopefully, is going to be better. And I want to focus on that. I think there's a lot of issues, blame, things that have not been done right, on the side of every player you can think about. And I think we need to move away from the past and adopt new practices. Well, one of the practices that was not happening in the past was business was not engaged. It's been a very adversarial relationship with labor. It's been a very opposing relationship, how to minimize costs, not how to attract talent, grow talent. We now have a major inflection point on technology, AI. How much further are the gaps going to be if workers are going to be left behind? How much more are the gaps going to be? We talk about full employment, but at the same time, every headline in the newspaper is about companies can't find people to work. Qantas Airlines had no baggage handlers. Delta, we've all lived through it. All the airlines had not enough people, so flights had to be shut down. Grocery stores, if they're not stocked, shelves are empty, we can't shop. These are positions that are critical for our economy, and they're critical for business. And I think it's the big difference that we have to move forward with is engaging business, holding business responsible for what is happening to workers in their companies. Many of these low-wage jobs are bad jobs. You know, the term good jobs has become very popular, but the reality is these are difficult jobs, long hours, sometimes dangerous, sometimes utterly boring. We call them dull, dirty, and, so all of that will need to change, and you're going to have to involve business in that process.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. That's right. And I like the idea of like the positive spin to it. Like, how do we actually think about the ways in which workers can take power, right? And build the collective bargaining and the collective power that is necessary to be able to make the demands with an employer that might not even think about the basics of a good employer, right? The growth of jobs is going up. You point out, like, there's a lot of job creation. So the question mark is, like, what kind of quality, what's the quality of the jobs, right? And how do we make sure that we build within that economic security? So I have a question for you, Juliana, in terms of that question around UBI potentially being a tool. And I want to just make sure that I'm not paraphrasing this, but potentially a tool to address the insecurity crisis problem, right? The job insecurity, the lack of economic security, and being potentially a tool to help solve it. Do you see that? In which way? How will you imagine that to happen, if in any way?
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. So I think that unfortunately the safety nets are not as robust as they should be. People fall through the cracks. They fall through the cracks with their children. They get ill. They get isolated. They get so stressed because they struggle to make ends meet that they fall into addictions. So this country in particular is dealing with an economic insecurity crisis that's suffocating its population. That's not disconnected from the low-wage crisis, but it's a very important problem. So I think I see universal basic income as helping build this robust floor. If you ask me, I said it was a moral imperative in my presentation. I am a philosopher, so I think about those important social rights, these moments where we need to move forward. And I think we can guarantee the right to an income. We can do that. As a society. It's not necessarily going to happen right away, but I think I like to think that one day it's going to be as obvious as the right to vote for us. So just to say about how it connects again with the low-wage crisis and what we discussed now with bargaining power, I think it's really important to remember that people really want to work. Because often when we talk about social benefits, when you just talk about cash, people worry that people are just going to stop working, they're not going to be motivated to work. But what I think it does achieve, though, is helping us recognize that some jobs are not at all appealing, so unappealing that it becomes irrational to choose to take those jobs if you have access to a decent safety net on the side. Of course, you don't have those safety nets that are decent, so people are still forced to take them. So we need to change the balance of power here by ensuring that the safety nets are such that, of course, people are still motivated to want to work, because that's what they want to do. But they could, if the opportunities in front of them were so poor that they would be worse off going there and taking the job. So, people want to work because they want more income. Even if you have a decent safety net, a robust safety net, you still want more income. They want to make a social contribution. They want the structure that the jobs afford them, and they want the relationality of the jobs. So people want all those things. We just need to find solutions such that employers in particular are forced to offer good working conditions. I would just end by adding to this discussion that the history of guaranteed income in this country is very connected with the struggle of mothers, including black mothers, for recognition of the important work that they were not able to do on welfare. Because they weren't able to actually look after their children as they wanted to do because of the deep insecurity that the welfare system left them in. So Johnny Tillman, for instance, advocated for a guaranteed income for all, and she advocated it as the right to life itself. So we should never forget the people who are doing very important work all around us. Work that maybe they won't be doing for their entire life, but right now they have small children that need to be looked after and need to be able to do that in dignity, right? So it's not to say the better solution is for people to opt out of the labor market, but it's to recognize the complexity of our existence and the fact that caregiving is also an important aspect of our existence, right? And it's not just caring for our children when they are young, it's also caring for our aging parents when they age, for example. Having the opportunity, for example, to take those 6 months to look after an aging parent who has very little time to live. So this is the bigger picture of this crisis of financial insecurity, which is connected with the low-wage crisis.
Thank you for giving us a bigger picture, because I also do want to bring you all, the three of you, before we go to questions from the panel, to just address something that is also very critical. And, you know, we talk about the low-wage workers, the low-wage economy, but the topic that is important is around the sub-minimum wage. That's an active conversation right now, and specifically to pay people with disabilities. And that is also, to your point earlier, like caregiving, care receiving, like how are we creating these jobs? How are we paying folks specifically when it comes to people who have disabilities? Any thoughts on this? Any?
I'll take a shot at it. We've done research on what we call hidden workers. They're not hidden workers because they don't want to work, because Juliana is absolutely right. Everyone wants to work. It's part of their identity. People feel good at work. They value themselves at work. But hidden workers are people who want to work but are not able to work and join the workforce because of our hiring practices. We have used technology to change our hiring practices. And once again, you know, Larry spoke about full employment, but what about the many millions of people who have fallen out of employment and want to come back into the workforce and are now not able to come back due to two very important factors: caregiving, for which there is no infrastructure. So if a mother drops out of the workforce to raise a child for 3 years, when she applies again in the automated tracking system, it kicks her out automatically because her resume has a 3-year gap. A disabled person, because they look at a job posting and they see we don't match these criteria, so they either don't apply because our job postings are so long and torturous, or they don't clarify that, look, I have this issue, I can't do these tasks. But, you know, in the word disabled, a large part of the word is able. There's a lot everyone can do. And our hiring practices are not looking for people who can do what the job requires. We're looking for perfect candidates. And that has narrowed the aperture and kept many folks out of the workforce. So once again, I feel this is something where companies need to change their hiring practices, open up wider, and bring in more folks, and help with caregiving.
So this sub-minimum wage for disabled workers is something that's been present in the law since the 1930s. So getting paid less is actually a policy. And, you know, I've reviewed what various commissions have said, what advocates for disabled workers have said, and there's a bipartisan consensus that we need to eliminate the legal provision that you can pay disabled workers less. Those advocating that position are very clear that this should only be done in a gradual way, that all the services that disabled workers are provided now need to be maintained, and they need to be expanded upon. But the fact is that 7 states eliminated this sub-minimum wage, and in those states, the share of workers with disability that are employed actually rose substantially. So there are special needs, and they need to be accounted for, but we shouldn't do it by just forcing a lower wage. And I hope I'd like to make some comments on UBI eventually, if you want. Okay.
Yeah, we'll come back to
yeah, I don't have a lot to add to this, but I just wanted to say that those programs that are meant to kind of incentivize employers to hire workers who are seen as less appealing or attractive are often a license to exploitation. And we should really worry about that. We should also worry about the messages, the expressive message those programs send. Exactly as you said earlier, you know, the able and disabled. And I would really say I did do some work related to that, which is, again, on welfare and benefits in the UK, where actually the population that has experienced the most cuts post-financial crisis was disabled benefits recipients who saw their benefits, for many, slashed overnight because of new criteria in establishing fitness for work. So I think we should really be careful, because the way our most vulnerable members are treated is often, telling a lot about the directions in which the system is going. And so we need also to think about that, again, comprehensively, not just thinking about wages, but also thinking about the benefits programs that are in place and how generous they are, and whether they really enable a dignified existence so that people can make choices. People with terminal diseases saw their benefits cut overnight, so not everyone's going to be able to work or to be employed. And it's very important to make sure that people can make the best choices for themselves and their families in the most difficult times in their lives.
I just want to add that what Juliana said about these programs, they lead to tokenism. They lead to 5 people being hired who come into the company and nothing in the company has changed to accommodate them, and they are set up to fail. And then everyone within the company says it doesn't work. And that becomes the legacy. Unless you are doing this as a strategy and saying, I'm going to do this at scale. And some companies, for purely business reasons, that they can't fill positions, for example, CVS, for example, Walgreens, have now got a stated policy that they will hire at scale folks with physical and mental challenges. But they are very clear on what the job requires. And they had to change every practice, including onboarding and training. They had to set up a separate training unit. So it's not about sub-wages. Actually, employers have to invest in these workers to give them the systems and support. It's actually not an inexpensive process, but the end result is your positions are filled and you can serve the customer.
Thank you for that. So now we have time for a few questions from the audience. So we'd like to just see, there are mics there, right above. We have, yes, they have a couple mics. There you go. And we're gonna take 2 questions at a time so that we can make the best use of the time for everybody. So if you have a question, please come up to the mic and just let us know.
So my question is, looking at the trends that have taken place over the last 40, 50 years, and I think Larry, if I can call you Larry, was talking about that there was a real concentrated, intentional effort to kind of slow down the living quality of people across the board, unless you were part of what my late wife used to call the white boy club. Anyway, so, and she was part of that group. The question that I have is, these are beautiful things that we're talking about, but do you think that it will be allowed by those who are actually in power? Are they going to fight it, or are they going to really work towards keeping people down further and further and further until they're basically slaves to a ruling class? I'm just curious what you think the trend is and how possible any of these proposals might actually be in terms of coming into reality. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity for this conversation. And what I'm perceiving is there is the debate of the companies that have the assets. You mentioned Walgreens and McDonald's. I'd like to ask the panel to comment on how this conversation integrates entrepreneurs, individuals who are entering the workplace, have an idea of a new business. We talked about there's so many jobs, so many businesses, but right, so many of these businesses are small. They're business owners who are still looking to integrate and survive, and how do we support these entrepreneurs in light of this conversation?
Thank you, thank you. Any of you would like to take any those two questions? Yeah. Yeah, go for it. You have a mic?
Well, go ahead. Keep talking.
It's a great question. Thank you for asking that. An entrepreneur is the seed corn through which an economy grows and prospers. And we need more and more of them. But they also have a high death rate in terms of the business. And very few survive, very few grow. Even fewer become companies of scale that then go on to create many more jobs. So you need a strong economic, competitive environment where business can flourish, companies can grow, and that's its own set of policy issues. And what was your question specifically on, the pressure on a small business owner to pay higher wages, for example? That is exactly the question that, it's not a fight between JP Morgan Chase, Walmart. A large part of our economy, large part of our workers are hired by small businesses. And so there's this, higher healthcare costs. If you have 50 employees, you have to pay higher healthcare costs. So now you suddenly see businesses doing everything to keep their employment down below 49. So that they don't have to pay healthcare costs. Do you want that economy? No. What you actually want is that small business owner to grow double, triple, and become 1,000 jobs employer. So all I can say is there is tension, and this has to be understood on both sides. And the only solution to that is, at the same time, you cannot have unsustainable wages where people say, I would rather be at home caring for my child than being in the workforce because, for $7, it doesn't even make sense for me. I'm going to be in debt. So, you have to find the balance.
So this gives me a chance to elaborate on it. Manjari said that we were talking about how bad things were. I actually think my analysis is very hopeful. And it's very hopeful because, one, we've seen political power used to implement policies that lift people up, and that it's actually started working. And so we do see the employer class is not going to go, accept this very readily. We've seen a big shift in the population of voters favoring taxing the rich and corporations much more. That's bipartisan. I mean, there's like half of the Republicans who want to tax the rich and corporations more. We have an analysis of both parties, amazing to me, that says the economy is rigged against workers. I mean, that's both Trump and the Democrats. Now, they may disagree about how the rigging is done and who the problems are, but there's no one saying let the market rip, okay? So I think that it is a political battle, it's an ideological battle, intellectual battle, and it can be won, and I really hope it will be.
And maybe I don't have too much to ask, but just maybe to say that what's really important is to do everything we can to shift the balance of power, and for sure that's a very difficult task. But there is an interesting, the notion that you could, to just go back to UBI, because this is what I'm talking about today, this notion that you could rely on this kind of income independent of labor to, in all sorts of ways that would increase your bargaining. So, for instance, you could use it as a strike fund. I come from France, where a lot of those important social struggles were won through the right to strike. And I'd like to think that sometimes there is also convergence of interest and we can move forward at a key moment. But when it's not the case, then it's really important that we have something to fall back on so that we can organize and demand the rights that we know are rightfully ours.
Thank you, Juliana. So I think we have time for 2 more questions. Would you like to come?
Good afternoon. I've come aware that a sector of libertarians have surprisingly become proponents of universal basic income because they see it as a means to deconstruct the bureaucracy of the social welfare system as they see it, and let the market handle the problem, maybe save for the initial entry point into the market. I'm wondering what you think of that notion.
Thank you for the question. We're going to take one more question, and if you have other questions, please just submit them, and then we'll get the panel to answer after to make sure that we have enough time. But go ahead.
I found the question about bringing people with challenges into the workforce really interesting. I guess my question is, because our society tends to silo those workers, whether it's neurodiversity or physical problems that people have, how could we expect corporations to create the fabric and knit a culture where these people will feel welcomed, when there's actually a culture in a company that mirrors what we as a society think is acceptable? Because our children tend to be put into different little classrooms based on their perceived IQ or their perceived abilities. It's hard as adults to all of a sudden switch and then all of a sudden think it's okay to maybe work with somebody that may be different than you. So that would be question number 1. I'm going to ask one more anyway. I have a really big issue with seniors and how we treat them on every single level of the stratum. I feel as if workers, once they may be 55 and 65 and older, because we don't take care of our elderly and live in the communities with them, you've all said that everybody wants to work. I'm not sure I agree. I'm serious. But if we do all believe that, how do we take someone, whether they're an executive director at a huge company or maybe a retail worker, and then cast them aside when they're no longer useful to us? And is there a way to transition those workers into meaningful roles at work or maybe someplace in the middle?
Thank you. Thank you. So we take those 2 questions. Anyone like to get a kick?
Sure. Maybe something about the libertarian interest in universal basic income. So that's actually not a particularly recent phenomenon. Among the many proponents of versions of basic income, like the negative income tax, were Milton Friedman. And I think there is a genuine philosophical commitment to something about cash there, which has to do with the lack of intrusiveness and that the program like that grants individuals. So he has this famous interview where he objects to the kind of large bureaucracy required to monitor women in their homes to see if there is a man living there, to decide whether or not the state should grant those women cash, right? So that's the genuine part. I think I am not sure. So there are almost as many versions of the basic income proposals as there are proponents of basic income. A big question is, how is it funded? How high is it? Is it used to replace what's already in place, or is it there as a supplement for what's already there? So all those questions are going to be key. It's not clear to me that the level of commitment to universal basic income from some very vocal libertarian proponents is genuine. So you often hear Elon Musk or people like that saying, yeah, UBI would be a great idea. It's not clear that there's a sustained interest beyond that. It's not clear that there is an empowering of the groups that are arguing for a transformative universal basic income beyond that. And then I should end by saying that there is a danger with a version of UBI that acts as a kind of hush money, where it's, you're going to lose your job to the next wave of automation, but, you've got your cash to rely on. There's not much more that we owe you. You have this cash, you can consume with it. And so, of course, that's very much a kind of a vision of a society that's dystopian and that we want to avoid. We didn't say everyone wants to work regardless of the kind of work that's available. I guess what we were saying is, by and large, people do not opt out of the labor market when they are provided with cash unconditionally. That's the data we have. And that's because people are after so much. But if we provide awful jobs. We shouldn't be surprised that people at some point are deterred from accepting those jobs. So I guess that was the idea behind the free.
Well, let me say something about UBI, and then you can handle the seniors and stuff.
You have to say something for UBI today before we leave, Larry.
waiting.
Please go for it.
I appreciate everything you're saying. This is where I'm going to indicate why I think shouldn't be a policy priority. All right, that's not to disagree about everything. And I want to point out that we have the highest share of people employed in many decades right now. We have low unemployment, but there is a real commitment to work. One of the things that I think UBI runs against is a very strong cultural value, both among taxpayers and among workers themselves, that they want to get their income from work. And we have seen that things that are government supports for people who work we're losing ground. Unemployment insurance, after Republicans took over a lot of state legislatures in 2010, they dramatically cut the number of weeks you can get unemployment. They've been cutting the benefits. The share of workers who are unemployed who receive unemployment insurance is way down, and we have not yet really started to recover from that. We've had a great income transfer program called the Child Tax Credit in the early Biden administration. It went up from $2,000 to $3,000 and to $3,600 for young children, ages 0 to 6. That lowered poverty by 1/3. That was amazing. And my friends are trying to restore that. But let me just say that I observed that when that went down, there was not a political uprising. There was no political price to pay for those people who ended that program. And that to me indicates we have a very steep hill. That's not to say we shouldn't fight it. It's a very steep hill. Now, UBI is going to be very expensive. And there is a big issue, as everyone's acknowledging, that some people want to use this to replace what we have. So it's actually not going to be a net help. It might be a replacement. And, even $12,000 a year, that's a lot of money, but, if the typical worker makes around $60,000, it doesn't get you that far to rely on $12,000. Note that the child tax credit that was implemented was available to married couples who earned up to $150,000. It was very broad. And I'm against narrowly targeted transfer programs, and UBI wants to give it to everyone. So I'm for a very broadly targeted, but I'm not sure I want to give people with $300,000 of income $12,000 a year. And we have a big fight over taxing rich corporations more. It is a huge fight. If we are successful, I think it's going to go to child care. It's going to go to other issues. I wouldn't want to use that for UBI.
Thank you, Larry, for that. I'm going to give you just the last to respond to the question, but just because we have limited time, I do want to point out that there is a last poll, if you have a moment, that you can just get through the QR code and just give us your opinion about what are the 3 solutions that we have presented here or the conversation that we have. Which one do you believe, matches more on your point of view? So please do that, and then Marjorie, if you can please just answer the question on the business side.
I'll be quick about the first question, which made a statement. It was less a question, it was more a statement and acknowledgement of the truth, which is, yes, if you want to hire at scale any kind of type of worker, you better have a culture that welcomes them, and culture building is difficult, it's hard work. But I'd like to say, who is an organization, or who is a corporation, or who is a company? It's people. Let's not forget that it's people managing other people. And if the right ideas are percolated from the top down, or the right ideas bubble up from bottom up, you can build culture and build the right culture. And many of our organizations, given the events that have happened in the past few years, are suddenly thinking and struggling and finding ways to cope with better cultures than they've had. So there's that. But the question about elders. So once again, when you talk about full employment, that's the number politicians love, economists love, and it's a great number that shows you, there are very many levels of unemployment in the economy. The full employment number gets all the attention. But there's another number out there, workers who are discouraged, workers who are marginalized. That number is being counted regularly along with the unemployment number. And that number has been rising. And who are those workers? They are people who've dropped out of the workforce, stopped looking for a job in the last 6 months. They have been searching for jobs, have stopped looking for a job in the last 12 months. Have you applied for a job and not received a response? What does it feel like? Awful. Who are those people? They are caregivers. And many of them are people with mental and physical health issues. And many, many, many of them are what we call older workers. Who are older workers? Well, if I'm a 32-year-old manager, anybody older than me is an older worker, and I'm not going to hire them. If I'm a 45-year-old manager, anybody older than me is an older worker, and I'm not going to hire them. How do we bring them back into the workforce? What happened with COVID? There were no nurses. So across countries, across the world, everyone went to nurses who had retired and begged them to come back to work. And they did. And they performed brilliantly. So bringing older workers back to the workforce requires training for young managers who are hiring for positions to train them how to have people, and then those people not to behave like boomers and telling them what to do. Have to know their place in the organization.
Thank you for that. I hate to do this, but we're coming up to the end now of the event. Again, if you have questions, you want to follow up, please just be in touch. There is a QR code that you can just go on, and all of the panelists will be able to answer follow-up questions. Just to close us up, I mean, I think what we've heard today is that the problem that we're faced with is an issue of systemic problem, right? Like the precarity of work that can be addressed by policy solutions, can be addressed by the interventions that good employers can make, but the ways in which workers are organizing together and coming and collectively bargain for better working conditions. So there is a complex conversation. Somebody mentioned it's complex, but at the same time, it's a systemic problem, and it's upon all of us to engage in the conversation, shift the working conditions, wherever it is that you work or wherever you will be working. I see a lot of young folks here. How are you engaging in collective power? And I think that will be my message to all of you. Nothing can happen without the voice of the workers and the folks who are at the workplace. But similarly, finding the right balance as to how do you communicate with employers, and with employers who want to do the right thing, and with employers who have so much power and control, know how to address it through collective bargaining and collective power. So I will leave you with that and say, like, keep it up, keep engaging with the town hall. The town hall is doing incredible events, and keep having the conversation in your neighborhoods with the people around that are organizing. I know there is many great groups in the movement, of the workers' rights movement, organizing and doing great work. Thank you again for this afternoon, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Unfortunately, we have to close it out because there's another event happening at 3:15 here. Otherwise, I will just spend the whole afternoon with everyone. But thank you, everybody.